Good evening, I hope you had a fantastic Saturday. Once again, London witnessed massive protests, and once more, the Palestinian flag was visible to everyone. I've mentioned before how the political climate of other nations has become quite prominent on our streets. However, I must admit what surprised me in many ways was seeing demonstrators like LGBT Jews for a free Palestine. It made me wonder if those advocating for LGBTQ rights genuinely understand what happens in Gaza and in many neighboring countries. It seems akin to a bird praying for Christmas. Speaking of prayer, on Saturday night in Whitehall, near 10 Downing Street, we saw a different kind of scene. Part of our national monument, dedicated to the victims of the two world wars, was used as the backdrop for a public prayer. It was something I never thought I would see in my own country. Nigel Farage has issued a stark warning that the growing frequency of demonstrations with foreign affiliations signals a change in Britain's political and cultural landscape, challenging the unity of the nation. For Farage, these shows of support for causes like Palestinian nationalism not only muddle the UK's foreign policy stance but also raise important questions about conflicting allegiances within the country. He argues that this goes to the heart of Britain's identity as a multicultural society, where shared values are under increasing pressure. Farage criticizes decades of immigration policies that, in his view, allowed communities from vastly different cultural backgrounds to settle in the UK without prioritizing integration. The result, he believes, is the rise of distinct subcultures that run counter to British society, creating division and, at times, hostility towards national values. Religious customs, such as the Islamic call to prayer, are becoming a part of these protests, and Farage claims that this highlights diverging norms that can feel contentious or exclusionary in a country with predominantly Christian or secular traditions in public spaces. He questions whether these displays challenge the balance between religious freedom and maintaining a unified public identity.
Starmer emphasized the need to prioritize those in greatest need, framing the cuts as a difficult but necessary choice in the current economic climate. However, for many, these explanations rang hollow, further widening the divide between Labour and its traditional supporters. Behind the scenes, tensions were rising within the Labour Party. Some MPs voiced concerns more openly, fearing that under Starmer's centrist leadership, the party was drifting away from its core principles. There were even whispers of a potential leadership challenge, though no one had yet stepped forward to take him on directly. The backlash in Doncaster wasn't just about policy. It reflected a broader dissatisfaction with the direction in which Starmer was leading the party. His cautious, centrist approach seemed to alienate the very voters Labour had once counted on. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party seized the moment, using the Doncaster incident to criticise Labour's policies and portray Starmer as out of touch with the struggles of ordinary Britons. In the weeks following the event, Starmer's team scrambled to regain control of the narrative. They worked hard to show a more compassionate side of the Labour leader, but for many, the damage had been done. Restoring trust with disenchanted voters would require more than just policy changes or public apologies. It would demand a fundamental shift in approach and a renewed connection with the people Labour claimed to represent. The events at Doncaster marked a turning point, highlighting the growing tension between Labour's leadership and its base. As Starmer faced the challenge of proving he could not only lead but also understand the struggles of those most affected by his party's decisions, the dispute over the winter fuel cuts became a symbol of a much larger problem. Critics of the separation of immigration and public services will have a field day accusing Starmer of using his funds for the US elections rather than addressing the domestic crisis. The story writes itself. Labour is out of step with British priorities and more focused on gaining power overseas than addressing pressing issues at home. Labour sends 100 people across the Atlantic to to meddle in a foreign election, and it hardly makes a dent. If this story gains traction, it could cause a significant backlash. The media's lack of outrage over Labour's US interference in comparison to the constant attacks on Farage exposes a blatant bias. Voters who care about national sovereignty and keeping foreign entanglements at arm's length will not look kindly on Storer's strategy. Expect the Conservatives, and certainly Farage, to hammer this narrative home in the weeks to come. You've got Jay there saying he wants to retire. Nigel, you've got KYB. I'm kind of hinting at the fact that she admires him a bit, really, I think. So where are you on this? Which one of those two would you ever work with? Neither. Because Nigel clearly is on, living rent-free in their heads, is the subject of debate here. Because in reality, people in this country who are patriotic, who want secure borders, who want net migration to be frozen, who want to see our public services fixed, know that Nigel Farage is the man who's going to be able to do that. He'll be our next Prime Minister. The both of these candidates who put themselves forward, again, they don't seem to appreciate. I totally understand why people believe that the Tories are unable to accept that they had 14 years to implement everything that you just heard. 14 years. And not only did they fail to implement a single one of those things, they did the complete opposite. All of the polling that we've done internally and all the public polling shows Reform voters who left the Conservatives are never going back, and the opposite is happening. Zia YF claims that the Conservatives are feeling the heat, and half of Conservative voters want a merger with Reform because they believe that Reform would be the party that provides for the British people. Farage's Reform by Nigel talk of a merger is gaining traction, as Tory supporters worry that a split vote may give Labour an easy victory, and the UK is making significant progress in luring disenchanted people away from the Conservatives on topics like immigration and Brexit. Farage's increase portends serious problems for the Conservatives, who are now fighting to maintain their base. Farage's Reform UK is gaining traction, especially among disenchanted Conservative voters who believe the Tories have failed on important issues like immigration, Brexit, and national sovereignty reform. This rise is causing the Conservative Party to tremble, as it now faces the real threat of a split right-wing vote that could give the victory to Labour or other opposition parties. Some Conservative voters are calling for a merger or alliance with Reform UK in order to avoid the split, which would increase the right-wing vote. Practical difficulties still exist, because Farage's hardline stance on issues like immigration contrasts with the Conservatives' more moderate tone, and a merger would raise questions about leadership, as Farage likely demands a significant role. Such a move could also alienate centrist voters who find Reform policies too extreme. The Tories are in a vulnerable position if they continue to lose voters to Reform without addressing these issues, putting their chances in future elections, particularly against Labour, at serious risk. The call for a merger reflects deeper dissatisfaction within the Conservative Party and highlights Farage's growing influence, but it's unclear if Farage would agree to such a deal because it could dilute Reform's distinct message. However, if they don't come together, the right could become less competitive and lose important constituencies in the event of a split vote. We appreciate you viewing, and we would love to know what you think of the material. Please leave a comment below and remember to like. Additionally, subscribe to keep up with our most recent videos